Welcome to Better Than a Booster, where I suggest budget cards for your commander decks that cost less than a booster pack. Currently, Murders at Karlov Manor packs are really cheap. Some of them can be found for under $3 even. So, for this video, all the cards are $3 or less. Before I get into the list, if you like my videos, consider subscribing and checking out the Patreon. Thanks. I'm going to start with a few Fallout cards since they're at their cheapest right now, a little bit after the set comes out and it's still in print. And I think Diamond City is an auto-include in a lot of commander decks. It's a land that enters untapped with a shield counter on it, meaning if it would be dealt damage or destroyed, you remove the shield counter instead. It taps for a colorless, and you can tap, move a shield counter from Diamond City onto target creature. Activate only if 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn. So as a utility land, since it enters untapped, it's really easy to slot into almost any deck. And then it just protects a creature. Let's say you cast your commander and any other creature. Now you can put a shield counter on it and your commander is extra protected. But it doesn't have to be your commander. It can protect any creature as long as you had 2 creatures come into play. And since you always have access to 1 in the command zone, it's relatively easy to set up a situation where you cast 1 creature, probably your commander, and something else you want to protect, or the other way around. This basically goes into all 2 and 1 color decks that have a creature you want to protect, which oftentimes is your commander, so it kind of goes in most decks. And since this card is $1 right now, you might as well get a copy. If you don't think Diamond City is for you, how about Mariposa Military Base? Another land that enters the battlefield tapped if you want, and then you get 2 rad counters. Otherwise, it's just an untapped land. It taps for a colorless, and you can pay 5, tap, draw a card. This costs 1 less to activate for each rad counter you have. So if you're in a self-mill deck, you can have it enter tapped to mill yourself and get some synergies with the rad counters. But let's pretend you have no self-mill synergy. You don't care about the rad counters at all. Then this is just an untapped land that has pay 5 mana, draw a card. That's really good in low color decks as free value from your lands. It's like a Castle Locthwain, but you don't take any damage from it. Late game, if you need an answer, you top deck this and hey, you can draw another card. Or if it's already in play, it draws you a card just when you don't have anything else to do. And in any game that goes long, this card is going to feel really good. Getting extra value from these lands seems like, oh, it's a niche situation or it's not going to come up that often, but in a deck that doesn't need all of its colors all the time, like if you're not in a 5-color shell, playing one of these over a basic is oftentimes free value. There's essentially no opportunity cost, which makes these auto-includes in a lot of decks. And this card is like 15 cents, so if you want it, it's easy to get. Last budget Fallout card I want to talk about is Acquired Mutation. I'm a huge fan of the whole enchantment aura goad cycle, and this is basically another one of those. It's a 3-mana aura that enchants a creature, giving it +2/+2 and goads it. And then whenever enchanted creature attacks, defending player gets 2 rad counters. I think goading a big creature is almost always better than removal, because forcing it to attack your opponents and making them deal with it is awesome, since every turn they don't deal with it, they just take damage. Like the other cards in this pseudo cycle, it buffs up the creature, making a big creature even more threatening. And then the radiation just adds extra damage. If you're in some sort of mill deck, then this could be really great. You get extra value out of that radiation mill. It might backfire if there's a lot of graveyard decks in your metagame, since they might actually get benefit from the self-mill, but that's pretty niche, and if you're playing this with random players, they're probably not going to get that much benefit from the radiation. Plus, the card's super cheap. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Eldrazi Titans as these big be-all, end-all game-winning threats, but a lesser-known Eldrazi is Artisan of Kozilek. This 50-cent card is 9 mana for a 10/9 Eldrazi with Annihilator 2, and when you cast this spell, you may return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that first effect, being a cast trigger, means if they counter the Artisan, you still get the creature back into play. Because of that, this card is almost always going to take either 2 removal spells or a board wipe to deal with efficiently. Even if you bring back a medium or lower powered creature, this is a 10/9 with Annihilator 2. it's a threat on its own. You can play this in any ramp-heavy green deck, cast it after a board wipe, and recover to get massive value. Also works super well with Temur Sabertooth. Blade of Selves is a card that was really expensive for a long time, but after a bunch of reprints, it's finally fallen to below $3. Blade of Selves is a 2-mana equipment with Equip 4 that gives the equipped creature Myriad. So when the creature attacks, it gives you 2 more copies, tapped and attacking your other opponents. This is awesome with Enter the Battlefield triggers. You can attack and get 2 more creatures entering the battlefield to use that effect. An important note about Myriad tokens is that they get exiled at the end of combat, so if you want to use this with death triggers, you're going to need a sacrifice outlet. This card is so good with commanders like Gonti or Ao the Dawnsky, because even though the creatures get sacrificed due to the legend rule, you still get the enter the battlefield triggers or the death triggers since the legend rule causes you to sacrifice. This card is great, pick one up if you got a deck leaning into ETB or death triggers. Recently, I've been really into playing MDFCs, and I've been testing more and more of them. Hagra Mauling is one that is so good. Like many of the cards on this list, it's only $1. 2 black, destroy target creature. This costs 1 less if an opponent has no basics. And then the other side is a tapped black land. So the cost reduction aspect is mostly useless. It does say if an opponent not defending the player, so if anyone has no basics, it's only 3 mana, which is kind of neat. But for the most part, it's like a charm that is a land on one side and creature removal on the other. Early game, you play it as a tapped land, it's fine. Late game, you draw it, it's removal. MDFCs are so good. I'm probably going to have to make a whole video talking about how great these cards are in Casual Commander. But yeah, play it in basically any black deck. Bronze Guardian is a card that does a lot. 4 and a white for a star 5 golem with double strike, ward 2, and other artifacts you control have ward 2, and his power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. So it protects itself with ward 2, and it protects your other artifacts with ward 2, so already great. And then let's just say you have 3 other artifacts in play. That makes this a 4/5 with double strike, which makes it really hard to attack into and also slams in for 8 damage. 3 artifacts in play other than this is really low. When we're talking mana rocks and artifact lands and just other things you're going to play random artifacts, this is easily going to have 7 or more power and can be a finisher on its own. I think this is crazy strong in basically any artifact deck in white. When you think of red removal, people often think of Chaos Warp and maybe the new Wild Magic Surge, but not much else in the way of spot removal. But I'm going to tell you about Mizzium Mortars, which I think should be up there as a good red removal spell. 2 mana, deal 4 damage to a creature is pretty on rate. Sorcery speed holds it back, but 2 mana to knock out most creatures is not bad. But then it can be overloaded for 6. This can clear most of the board, destroying almost all utility creatures or tokens. But the best part is it only hits creatures you don't control. So this is a one-sided board wipe sometimes. It reminds me a lot of Feed the Swarm, a sorcery speed removal spell that kind of sucks because it's sorcery speed, but has utility, so you play it anyway. I feel like Mizzium Mortars falls into the same category. The sorcery speed is kind of bad, but the utility upside of a one-sided board wipe is so good, I think it's worth playing. And it's dirt cheap like all the other cards on this list. There are a lot of cards that feel unbeatable if you get to untap with them, and Sphinx of the Second Sun speeds that up. 6 blue for a 6/6 Sphinx with flying. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, there is an additional beginning phase after this phase. So after combat, before main phase 2, you get another untap, upkeep, draw step. This card's insane, especially since the last reprinting brought it down to like 60 cents and it's a mythic. So the card's basically 0 mana because you untap all your lands as long as you played it in main phase 1. It gives all your creatures vigilance because it untaps all of them, and you can double up upkeep triggers. It lets you dump your threats on your turn and still hold up counterspells. This is one of the best blue finishers in Commander, and to top it all off, just being a 6/6 flyer means that it can often chip in for damage at somebody who just can't block it, and then untap itself. This card's insanely powerful. The last card I want to talk about is Obscuring Haze, which after the most recent reprint has stayed below $2. 2 and a green for an instant that says, if you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost. Prevent all damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures your opponents control. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of fog effects, but this one is very special. Having your commander out to make this cost 0 mana makes it better than basically any fog. But even more than that, it only stops damage from your opponent's creatures. So you can cast this and then triple block one big creature to kill it without losing any of your stuff. This whole free spell if your commander is in play cycle will honestly just creep up and up in price without another reprint. So if you want one of these, get it now while it's still cheap. Thank you so very much for watching. There are a ton of other great budget buys, so let me know your favorites in the comments below. Subscribe for more, check out the Patreon.